They told the wounded nurse to move away, her uniform stained with dust and blood, her arm shaking as she pressed cloth against a stranger's wound, and no one there knew her name, only that she was in the way, just another exhausted medic on a shattered battlefield where smoke still curled into the sky and radios crackled with half-broken commands. But what none of them understood was that this nurse, known only by her call sign, had already done what entire squads could not, because hours earlier, when the ambush tore through the convoy and bullets turned the desert into chaos, she didn't run, didn't freeze, didn't wait for orders. She moved forward, straight into gunfire, dragging Marines twice her size to cover, stabilizing wounds with hands that never trembled, whispering calm into dying ears while explosions shook the ground beneath her knees. And when the command net went silent, she was the one who climbed a burning vehicle to manually transmit coordinates through a damaged relay. Her voice steady as she reported casualty counts, enemy movement, and evacuation needs, refusing extraction for herself while others still breathed. And so when junior officers later barked at her to clear the landing zone, unaware of who she truly was, she simply nodded and stepped back, blood dripping onto the sand as the air suddenly changed, the distant thunder of rotors growing louder, heavier, unmistakable, until 4 Marine helicopters broke over the ridge in perfect formation, kicking up a wall of dust as they landed hard and fast, their ramps dropping before the engines even settled, and out came officers, pilots, and corpsmen moving with urgency but also something else, respect. Because the transmission had gone all the way up the chain, because Angel 6 wasn't just a nurse, she was the reason 23 Marines were still alive, the reason the ambush didn't turn into a massacre. And when the lead pilot shouted her call sign across the noise demanding Angel 6 by name, the entire field went silent, rifles lowered, radios paused, as she turned slowly, exhausted, wounded, barely standing, and walked forward while stunned Marines finally understood why command rerouted aircraft mid-mission, why medevac priority codes had been overridden, why commanders had spoken her call sign like it was sacred. And as she was lifted onto the helicopter, still giving instructions, still refusing pain meds until the last patient was secured, the men she saved stood at attention. Without being told, saluting not an officer, not a rank, but a medic who had become legend in a single night. And as the helicopters lifted off with Angel 6 aboard, the dust settled on a battlefield that would remember her long after the echoes faded, because some heroes don't arrive with weapons raised, they kneel in the dirt, hold the line with their hands, and leave behind lives that continue beating because they refuse to step away. As the helicopters disappeared into the horizon with Angel 6 aboard, the battlefield did not return to normal. It couldn't because silence settled heavier than the gunfire ever had, and the Marines left behind slowly began to understand the weight of what they had witnessed, replaying moments in their minds when they had ordered her to step aside, unaware that the wounded nurse they dismissed had been the unseen backbone of the entire operation. And as medics regrouped and commanders established control, reports began flowing upward, each one painting the same picture of a lone medical specialist who moved through chaos with impossible calm, treating blast wounds under direct fire, improvising tourniquets from torn straps, using her own body as cover while stabilizing critical casualties. And word spread faster than the helicopters that Angel 6 had refused evacuation 3 times, that she had stayed behind when ammunition ran low and morale broke, that she had coordinated casualty movement while bleeding from shrapnel embedded near her ribs. And the more the Marines talked, the clearer it became that the mission's survival wasn't luck or strategy alone, but the presence of one woman who refused to let anyone die if there was even a fraction of a chance to save them. Hours later, inside the medical bay of the forward operating base, Angel 6 drifted in and out of consciousness as surgeons worked quickly, pulling fragments from her arm and stitching wounds she had ignored for far too long. Yet even sedated she murmured instructions, casualty numbers, blood types, repeating names of Marines she wanted status updates on, forcing doctors to gently remind her that she was no longer on the field, while outside the base senior officers gathered, reviewing helmet cam footage and radio logs, watching in stunned silence as Angel 6 crawled through smoke to reach a Marine pinned under wreckage, listening to her steady voice cutting through panic on an open channel, and with every replay it became harder to describe her actions as simply doing her job, because the footage showed something deeper: leadership without rank, courage without command, and sacrifice without expectation of recognition. And when the base commander finally spoke, he didn't ask if she deserved commendation, only how soon she would wake, because he wanted to meet the person who had rewritten the meaning of battlefield medicine in a single night. By morning, the story had traveled beyond the base, beyond the battalion, reaching units that had never heard the call sign Angel 6 before but now spoke it with quiet respect, and when Marines who survived the ambush were cleared to visit her, they lined the hallway outside the medical ward, some with bandaged heads, others on crutches, waiting not as patients but as witnesses, each one carrying a memory of her voice telling them to breathe, to stay awake, to think of home. And when she finally opened her eyes, weak but aware, she found herself facing men who struggled to speak, men trained for war who now stood humbled by the nurse who had knelt beside them in the dirt, and as one Marine finally thanked her, voice breaking, she tried to wave it away, insisting she just did what anyone would do, but the silence that followed told a different story, because everyone in that room knew not everyone would have stayed, not everyone would have crawled back into fire, and not everyone would have become the reason others lived to see another sunrise. Days later, during an official debrief, her actions were read aloud in a room filled with medals, ranks, and authority, yet Angel 6 sat quietly, uncomfortable with the attention, her focus drifting back to faces she remembered from the field. And when the commanding officer described how 4 Marine helicopters were diverted mid-operation solely because of her transmission, the room went still, understanding the gravity of that decision, because such orders are not given lightly. And as the report concluded, it became clear that what happened that night would be taught not as legend, not as exaggeration but as doctrine, an example of how one medic's refusal to quit altered the outcome of an entire engagement. And when she was later informed that the Marines she saved had requested to name a future medevac training protocol after her call sign, she finally lowered her head, overwhelmed not by pain, but by the realization that her quiet determination had created a legacy far bigger than she ever intended. Long after the dust settled and the battlefield was cleared, the name Angel 6 remained, passed between units, spoken in training halls and whispered before missions, not as a myth but as a reminder that heroism doesn't always come with thunderous entrances or weapons raised high. Sometimes it arrives on tired feet, with bloodied hands and a voice steady enough to bring calm into chaos. And for the Marines who lived because of her, every heartbeat became proof of that night, every breath a continuation of a story she made possible. And though Angel 6 would eventually return to duty, scars hidden beneath her uniform, she carried with her something deeper: the knowledge that when the moment came, when she was told to step away, she stayed, and because she stayed, lives were saved, missions endured, and a battlefield learned that angels do not always descend from the sky. Sometimes, they stand their ground. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that night refused to fade, and as Angel 6 returned to limited duty, moving carefully through the base with her arm still healing, she began to notice subtle changes in how people reacted to her presence, conversations lowering when she entered a room, Marines straightening their posture without realizing why, and though no official announcement had been made, respect followed her like a quiet shadow, because stories had a way of traveling faster than orders. And those who had not been there now understood that Angel 6 was not just a medic but a symbol of what happens when duty outweighs fear, and during training exercises young corpsmen were suddenly being told to study her after-action reports, to listen to the recordings of her voice under fire, to learn how calm could become a weapon stronger than any rifle, and while she remained humble, insisting that teamwork saved lives, the truth was becoming impossible to ignore. Her decisions had created a blueprint for survival under impossible conditions. The official recognition came without warning, announced during a routine assembly when the base commander stepped forward and called her name, and as Angel 6 stood at attention, still unsure why she had been summoned, the citation began to unfold, detailing moments that many in the formation had only heard rumors about, including how she had crossed an open kill zone to reach a fallen Marine, how she had coordinated triage while under indirect fire, and how she had refused extraction until the last casualty was stabilized, and as each sentence landed,